The Jesuits are behind the Vatican and are the power behind the White Pope. They are the gatekeepers of the New World Order. A former bishop reveals a few home truths about the Vatican. He says that they control the Illuminati and in turn control the New World Order. Bishop Bouffard, who left the church and followed Christ as a blood-bought believer, living in Canada after 6 years as a Vatican priest, assigned the task of passing daily sensitive correspondence between the Pope and the leaders of the Jesuit order, residing at Borgo Santo Spirito 5 near St. Peter's Square, says, yes, the man known as the Black Pope controls all major decisions made by the Pope, and he in turn controls the Illuminati, said Bishop Bouffard on Greg Szymanski's radio show, The Investigative Journal, at gcnlive.com, where archives of the startling statements can be heard in their entirety. I'm not sure if that's still available, by the way. People can't imagine how evil and how much destruction they have caused and will cause, while at the same time using the perfect cover of hiding behind black robes and professing to be men of God. Bishop Bouffard's first-hand knowledge of the evil lurking within the hierarchy of the Vatican, and particularly the Jesuit order, confirms the testimony of other researchers, including Bill Hughes, author of the shocking books The Enemy Unmasked and The Secret Terrorist, as well as preeminent researcher of the Jesuit order, Eric John Phelps, author of Vatican Assassins. Bishop Bouffard claims the evil power of the Jesuits extends throughout the world, including solid infiltration of the U.S. government, the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, and major religious organizations. And we have words from famous historical figures, many of them. Some of our founders warned us of these people, warned of the dangers. People that have written books about dictators warned about them, said they caused all the wars. So we have a lot of confirmation. Masons have had quite a history with the Jesuits. Freemasonry became rife in the Vatican by the 1970s. Pope Paul VI said, "The smoke of Satan has entered the church." When he passed on, he was replaced by John Paul I. John Paul was going to blow the whistle on how Freemasonry had permeated the Vatican. His reign lasted only 33 days. They seem to be signaling that he was right. 33. In 1978 August to 1978 September, according to some sources, he was murdered, and when his body was found, he was clenching a piece of paper with the names of some high-ranking officials of the Vatican. The man Francis, known as the Pope, is a Jesuit, and this is the first time in history that a Jesuit has become the White Pope. Never supposed to happen.
Paul Williams is a church historian who has written a number of books, including The Vatican Exposed. He worked for years as a consultant for the FBI.
I believe that the Pope was murdered. I believe that the Pope died because of an administration of digitalis, and I believe that he was murdered because reputations were at stake and fortunes could have been lost if he had proceeded as Pope. The cover-up began almost immediately. The Vatican Secretary of State called for an immediate embalming of the Pope's body without removing any of the blood. This rendered an autopsy almost impossible.
This conspiracy theory relies on three central pieces of evidence. First, the embalming or preservation of the Pope's body was done unnecessarily and suspiciously early. Second, contaminating the dead Pope's blood with embalming fluid was an effective way of masking the presence of a natural, though deadly compound known as digitalis. Third, the Vatican's account of the Pope's final day in office is full of inconsistencies and is unbelievable. A team of toxicologists, embalmers, and pathologists will, through a series of rigorous scientific tests, put these claims on trial. First, the time the embalming started.
Italian law dictates that the embalming process cannot begin until 24 hours after a corpse or cadaver is discovered. When Pope Paul VI died, several weeks before, his body was not embalmed until 24 hours after the death. That's Italian law that the Vatican adhered to. In this instance, the Vatican demanded that the the body be embalmed immediately.
The Vatican's reason was that an early embalming would prevent the Pope's body putrefying in the heat of the Roman summer, while it lay in state for 4 days. According to Paul Williams, the Pope's body was being embalmed within 6 hours of it being found, in marked contrast to his predecessor, who only died 33 days earlier in that same hot summer.
And this is what Mr. Williams wrote in the book The Vatican Exposed, Money, Murder, and the Mafia. The Vatican is the mafia, by the way, in case you didn't know that. You know, the ones with the casinos, and they're actually behind the Indian casinos, too. Over $50 billion in securities, gold reserves that exceed those of industrialized nations, real estate holdings that equal the total area of many countries, opulent palaces containing the world's greatest art treasures. These are some of the riches of the Roman Catholic Church. Yet in 1929, the Vatican was destitute. Pope Pius XI, living in a damaged, leaky, pigeon-infested Lateran palace, could hear rats scurrying through the walls, and he worried about how he would pay for even basic repairs to unclog the overburdened sewer lines and update the antiquated heating system. How did the Church manage, in less than 75 years, such an incredible reversal of fortune? The story here told by church historian Paul L. Williams is intriguing, shocking, and outrageous. The turnaround began on February 11, 1929, with the signing of the Lateran Treaty between the Vatican and fascist leader Benito Mussolini. Through this deal, Mussolini gained the support of the staunchly Catholic Italian populace, who at the time followed the lead of the Church. In return, the Church received, among other benefits, a payment of $90 million, sovereign status for the Vatican, tax-free property rights, and guaranteed salaries for all priests throughout the country from the Italian government. With the stroke of a pen, the Pope had solved the Vatican's budgetary woes practically overnight. Yet he also put a great religious institution in league with some of the darkest forces of the 20th century. Based on his years of experience as a consultant for the FBI, Williams produces explosive, never-before-published evidence of the Church's morally questionable financial dealings with sinister organizations over 7 decades through today. He examines the means by which the Vatican accrued enormous wealth during the Great Depression by investing in Mussolini's government, the connection between the Nazi gold and the Vatican Bank, the vast range of church holdings in the post-war boom period, Paul VI's appointment of mafia chieftain Michele Sedona as the Vatican banker, a billion-dollar counterfeit stock fraud uncovered by Interpol and the FBI, the Ambrosiano affair, that's the one that the Pope was trying to uncover when he was killed after 33 days, called the greatest financial scandal of the 20th century by the New York Times. Did you ever hear about it? The mysterious death of John Paul I, profits from an international drug ring operating out of Gdansk, Poland, and revelations about current dealings. Yeah, now they want to take over the world with their Great Reset, the COVID scam. Yeah, and there's much more. This is just the tip of a very big iceberg right here. Pope Francis, the White Pope, is said to be the first Jesuit Pope. Now, I think there have been others because many popes had been Jesuit trained in their colleges, so secretly were likely Jesuits. They weren't official. But Francis was installed in a coup at the Vatican with Hillary and George Soros, according to WikiLeaks, which is why Assange is locked up in prison now, right? Thanks to Donald and the CIA. But he was installed and Benedict was removed. There's no reason for his removal. He was fine. Usually they stay in for life. But he was removed because they wanted a Jesuit there, so they wanted no interference with their New World Order, or let's call it Satanic World Order. So that's what happened. That's why there's a Jesuit Pope. The Catholic Church has been fighting to try to straighten things out and get this influence out of their church. So that's why Hillary, all the Jesuits, Soros, and all of them, Rothschilds likely, had to get involved. They want the New World Order, and they need the Vatican to help do it. And now Francis is out there pushing environmentalism, all the social justice, which was created by the Jesuits. The whole social justice thing is just a new mask for Marxism. And now he's pushing it hardcore, ecumenicalism, trying to unite all the world's religions under one. The Catholic Church isn't Christian. A former Jesuit said that they created Islam. So now they're sitting over in Islam country, signing agreements with them and trying to form a one world religion with other religion that they actually created as a weapon against Christians. Because remember, it's the Jesuits who did the Inquisition ever since they were formed in 1540. They were the ones out there butchering Christians, because that's why they were created, to fight the Reformation, to fight Martin Luther, to fight Protestantism, which is a protest against the control of the Catholic Church. So they're out there and they take oaths to destroy Christians, Protestants. That's why they want to take over the church, because they hate Christianity. They're not Christians. They don't worship Jesus. They say they're the Society of Jesus, but they're not. They're the opposite.
In 1820, Luigi Fortis was elected the Black Pope. During his short term in office, he spent it institutionalizing the Jesuit plan of education into colleges in Europe, Canada, and the United States. And this was the birth of Greek life. And since 1825, all but 2 U.S. presidents and U.S. vice presidents have been fraternity men. Union College, a private male-only school in New York, established Kappa Alpha, the first fraternity. Since 1795, 19 U.S. presidents have attended this school, and 2 years after the birth of Kappa Alpha, Sigma Phi and Delta Phi were established. This triad referred to themselves as fraternities, which derives from the Latin word frater, meaning brother. Jesuit established fraternities started spreading to other campuses. National chapters were created, and that is how Greek life began in the United States. The first collegiate secret society was the Fat Hat Club, created in 1750 at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. President Thomas Jefferson was a member. Thomas Jefferson also wrote favorably about Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati and Jesuit professor. Although Weishaupt was the frontman for the Luciferian organization, he was actually backed and funded by the black nobility Farnese family. It was the House of Farnese who elevated the Rothschilds into power and moved the Farnese family seat of power to Washington, D.C. This family is one of the most powerful families on earth today. The Farnese family built their Pentagon fortress known as Via Caparola in Lazio, Italy. In their map room, which was designed in the 1500s, includes a painting of the world showing the continent Antarctica. Did you know that Antarctica was not officially discovered until the 1770s? This was around the same time the Farnese family recruited Adam Weishaupt to create the Illuminati and move the Farnese seat of power to Washington, D.C., where they built their second Pentagon. How did the Farnese family know about Antarctica? Interesting to note that the Washington capital is placed between Virginia and Maryland. Did you know that Larry Farnese is a state senator for Pennsylvania? In the book Rulers of Evil, Tupper Saucy explains how Washington, D.C. was built on land that was owned by the Jesuit-educated Daniel Carroll of the very rich and powerful Carroll family. Daniel's brother, John Carroll, was a Jesuit priest and the founder of the Jesuit college, Georgetown University. John Carroll was the priest of Pierre Charles L'Enfant, the man who was hired to design Washington, D.C. with occult symbology, the black nobility House of Farnese. The House of Farnese established the Society of Jesus, otherwise known as the Jesuits, as a military order through the papal bull under Pope Paul III, whose name was Alessandro Farnese. The leader of the Jesuits is called the Superior General, or the Black Pope. The first Black Pope was Ignatius of Loyola in 1539. Before Loyola was the Black Pope, he was a member of the Alumbrados, the Spanish Illuminati. The precursor to Adam Weishaupt's Bavarian Illuminati, which was started in 1776. Loyola was obsessed with fame and had a reputation of being a narcissist. Under the House of Farnese, Loyola's mission was to infiltrate and reform the Protestant and Catholic churches. Loyola established the methods of prayer, otherwise known as the spiritual exercises, which are still used today in all Jesuit training. The spiritual exercises stem from mystical and hermetic practices which enable demonic control. Hermetic magic is a type of black magic that originated from ancient Egyptians and was portrayed in the Book of the Dead. Rene d'Anjou, a descendant of the Merovingian bloodline, persuaded Cosimo Medici of the black nobility House of Medici family to establish a library at San Marco, where Plato, Pythagorean works, and books on Hermetic magic were translated. It was from Cosimo Medici's library that sparked up the Greek and Egyptian teachings by the Jesuits that influenced the Italian Renaissance. The Jesuits have been responsible for major deception and murder throughout history, which is unknown to the public. In the book, The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, the author claims that the powerful Giacomo Antonelli, a cardinal and secretary of the Papal States under Pope Pius IX, supervised the plot to kill Abraham Lincoln with the help of the Jesuits. Notice the hidden hand. And we all know about the JFK conspiracy involving the mafia and black nobility connections, but that would be an entire video in itself.
Especially I work in dealing with the infiltration of churches and religious institutions as well as government. That cover a tremendous number of institutions.
The purpose of that infiltration was what for?
Well, the purpose is what the Roman Catholic system has all the time as her own purpose, is to infiltrate, to penetrate all the areas of life where the Roman Catholic can have control and access for the coming world government. What that means is, in preparation for that world government, the Roman Catholic institution, especially since the establishment of the Jesuit order in 1541, to all these 500 years, they've been in preparation and through infiltration and penetration of every level of society in order to take over the world politically and religiously. There are two doctrines that define very well these dangerous goal of the Roman Catholic institution. Two doctrines define this very well. One is called the doctrine of the apostolic succession, and that is dealing with the papacy. And the other is the doctrine, the temporal power, and that is dealing with world government. Of course, both, because you can see that even the Pope and his own individual office, he meet those requirements. He is not only the head of his church, as he called himself, John Paul II, the present Pope, said he is the pastor of his church. He is not only that, but he is the head of his state, of his country. What that means, he is the head of a political state. Both combinations are in one office there. In prophetically speaking, that is what we see in the book of Revelation. The political power always hand to hand with the religious power.
Vladimir Putin was born on October 7th, 1952. He was born in Leningrad, which was then the Communist Soviet Union. His grandfather was the personal chef of communist leaders Stalin and Lenin. Kind of crazy. Lenin ruled Russia during the First World War, and Stalin was the general secretary of the Communist Party. They were both staunch Marxists. And when Putin was a child, he enjoyed reading the works of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto, and they were actually coached by Jesuit priests. There was a Jesuit priest by the name of Augustin B., who was German, and he stated that the Jesuits created the Communist Party for one reason, and that reason was to kill the tradition of the Orthodox Church in Russia. The Orthodox Church in Russia was headed by Tsar Nicholas Romanov at the time. The Communist Jesuit Party was secretly bankrolled by the black nobility of Rome. And it was the same time that the Jesuits came up with a master plan by having certain Jews who were loyal to the Vatican write the Protocols of Zion. And the Protocols of Zion were meant to do two things. First one was turn the world against the Jews by using them as a scapegoat to be a catalyst for the Inquisition against the Roman Catholic Church. So during this time, the Jesuits worked very closely with Karl Marx, Engels, Trotsky, Lenin, and Stalin. It was during this time that gold was transferred from Germany to Russia. Karl Marx was also associated with one of the most powerful Freemasons at the time, and his name was Giuseppe Mazzini. Mazzini was closely allied with the House of Orsini, where the Grey Pope allegedly derives from. Now, Giuseppe Mazzini was a 33rd degree Freemason, and he started the famous P2 Masonic Lodge, which started the term made men. Now, made men is a mafia term. Mazzini was a globalist and a Luciferian, and he worked with Marx to push socialist agendas in Europe and America, and helped the Italian mafia expand to the United States through the rigging of professional football. There's actually a book called Interference, and it includes many links to pro football and the mafia in modern history. And of course, Karl Marx, his socialist writings were funded by the Rockefellers and J.P. Morgan, because in fact, these socialist ideas were resurrected from none other than the Knights Templar. So in the early 1900s, Tsar Nicholas Romanov II ruled Russia. He was the descendant of the House of Romanov, which was a Russian ruling dynasty for over 300 years. The 1600s to 1917 was the time that this family, the House of Romanov, ruled, until the House of Romanov was executed in 1917. In the early 1900s, the Orthodox Church was spreading all over Europe. The countries like Turkey, Greece, Serbia, Romania, etc. And this was a huge problem for the Vatican and the Catholic Church. And what happened was the Jesuits and the black nobility decided to set up the First World War. Now, at the time, the Pope was backing Germany, which was ruled by Kaiser Wilhelm. Now, Kaiser Wilhelm was the grandson of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert from the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Now, this family derives from the German House of Hohenzollern. Hohenzollern. This house has a coat of arms that has a black and white checkerboard like you would see in Freemasonry. And they are one of the prominent original 18 families of the black nobility. And the descendants of the House of Hohenzollern are actually still around today. Just do a Google search of House of Hohenzollern, and that is a rabbit hole in itself. Now, the House of Hohenzollern, their primary function is to run the military that protects the bank for international settlements. They are a Nazi military bloodline. Okay, so Kaiser Wilhelm was working with the Pope Pius at the time, and the Jesuits to expand Germany. And now this ties in the Rothschild connection. If we go back to 1815, during the Congress of Vienna, this was the Rothschilds' first attempt at the New World Order, using the debt of the European nations as leverage. And the scheme actually failed, but they were at least successful in having Switzerland declared forever a neutral sovereignty in all future wars, in order that the funding of both sides could continue with impunity and unimpeded by the conflict. Okay, so this is how they operate. They are always controlling both sides. So the Rothschilds' ambitious one world government plan failed because Tsar Alexander I of Russia refused to be bullied by the Rothschilds. He was aware of their devious plot to enslave not only his country, Russia, but the entire world itself. Nathan Mayer Rothschild vowed from that day forward that either he or his descendants, the House of Rothschild, would destroy and take down the House of Romanov. And just over 1 century later, in 1917, the House of Romanov fell. And I will get more into that, but they were murdered by the Rothschild-sponsored communist Bolshevik thugs during the so-called Russian Revolution. And in 1869, Albert Pike predicted that there would be 3 world wars in order for the banksters to install their New World Order. And this would include religion being at the center of it. And in 1914, the first steps in bringing the pre-planned First World War started using Serbian nationalists. And they were a secret society called the Black Hand. So the Black Hand Secret Society was formed in 1911, and their logo was a skull, a vial of poison, a knife, and a bomb. The Serbian nationalists plotted the murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was a member of the black nobility house of Habsburg.
Alex Jones is he publicly lauded Martin Sheen's work. Martin Sheen is a Jesuit temple coadjutor par excellence.
No, Joe, I'm with the CIA. We're not saying you're with the CIA. And I wasn't with the CIA 25 years ago when I started out. I was with good elements of the CIA when Donald Trump got elected and tried to take the country back from the because we're under globalist control. The communist Chinese, the EU, Hollywood, the big banks, they say they run this country and they broke its back. So forget the CIA, it's bigger than Coca-Cola. None of the CIA like it's mysterious or cool, like talking about the post office. The CIA gets its talking points from me, Joe, and other patriots, not the other way around. I run the CIA, Joe. Absolutely, Charlie. It was good to see you a few weeks ago at your home.
Likewise.
You are looking great. You're completely clean, aren't you?
100%. You know, here's your first pee test. Next one goes in your mouth. No, you won't get high.
Charlie, I've known you for six and a half years or so, and I knew you were completely clean, and then I've known you since. But the point is, now I've never seen you when I was out at your house and talked to you on the phone so energized as you are now.
It's hate, and it must end now. B'nai B'rith, enlightening America and the world. We'll be here till there's no more hate.
there's a new sheriff in town, and he has an army of assassins. Oh, we must speak of the Vatican assassins. Yes. I don't read anything after it comes out, because I will not waste my precious time on such ridiculous nonsense. But I understand, according to you, that there was a lot of curiosity about the Vatican assassin. And I'm like, guys, it's right there in the thing. Duh, we work for the Pope. We murder people. We're Vatican assassins. How complicated can it be?
Oh, my gosh.
What they're not ready for is guys like you and I, and Nails, and all the other gnarlingtons in my life, that we are high priest, Vatican assassin warlocks.
Our media have ignored this. I mean, when you start looking at all the people that have been writing about the Jesuits over the century, and for this to be ignored, especially the concordat that was brought together between the Nationalist Socialist government and the Vatican, how can these people in the alternative media like Alex Jones and the rest of these guys ignore this? And how can the mainstream media ignore it? And I figured it's only one reason, that they must be working for them, because how can they look at this? For example, Mr. Joseph Robin, a Catholic writer, comments on the diplomatic agreement between the Vatican and the Nazi Reich on the 8th of July, 1933. And he writes, the concordat brought to the National Socialist government, considered nearly everywhere to be made up of usurpers, if not brigands, the seal of an agreement with the oldest international power, the Vatican. In a way, it was the equivalent of a diploma of international honorability. Thus, the Pope, not satisfied with giving his personal support to Hitler, which he did, granted in this way the moral support of the Vatican to the Nazi Reich. At the same time as the terror was beginning to reign on the other side of the Rhine and was tacitly accepted and approved, the so-called brown shirts had already put 40,000 persons in concentration camps. The programs were multiplying to the accents of the Nazi march. When the Jewish blood streams from the knife, we feel better again. And that was said by a Nazi sympathizer. In the following years, Pius XII saw even worse without being stirred. It is not surprising that the Catholic heads of Germany vied with each other in their civility towards the Nazi regime, encouraged as they were by their Roman master. One must read the disheveled ravings and verbal acrobats of opportunist theologians such as Michael Schmaus. He was later made a prince of the church by Pius XII and described as the great theologian of Munich by the publication La Croix on the 2nd of September 1954. And as we look at these writings, we see the agreement between the Vatican and all of its priests, all of its bishops, to support the Nazi Reich. And it goes on. And also, never once did the Vatican ever denounce the Third Reich. So what about the Fourth Reich, folks? What about the Fourth Reich led by the Vatican? Lessons from History of Roman Catholicism. Let me just read you this by Richard Bennett. He writes this, and then we'll get to Mr. Phelps. The lesson and warning of history that the undemocratic regimes whose leaders own allegiance to the Pope or practice the lofty principles of the Papacy pose a threat to individual liberty and carry out religious persecution. For example, the Inquisition was alive and well in the Balkans in the 1940s. Convert or die was the choice on the 900,000 Orthodox Serbs in the new state of Croatia, run by Nazi puppet Anton Pavelic and Roman Catholic primate Archbishop Aloysius Stepanek. 200,000 of them were converted, and the other 700,000 who preferred to die were tortured, shot, burned, and buried alive. This appalling persecution, carried out mainly by Ustashi priests and friars for the triumph of Christ in Croatia, included many of the worst atrocities of the war. Certainly the mutilations were horrific, the savagery terrible. Few people know what took place in Croatia during the Second World War. News of it had been simply suppressed. And with that, I want to get to another thing. That's exactly what's happening today. The truth about the Jesuits, the Vatican, and what's happening in our country is being suppressed.
It's also what happens when you listen to the radio host, Alex Jones, who claims that 9/11 and the Oklahoma City bombings were inside jobs.
being suppressed by the likes of people in the alternative media, and I can name their names, John Stadtmiller and his radio station, Jeff Brent, the rest of these guys, the Alex Jones and GCN, who control most of the alternative media, and many other people, have not given you the straight story. They've not researched history and will suppress this because they are protecting the Vatican so that this Inquisition can take place unabated in America. It's your life, folks. It's the life of your children. And if you're going to just fall for, their ploys, you know what? You deserve what you get. And the mainstream media has proved to be a whore. So now has the alternative media. With that, I want to get to Eric Phelps. Eric, how are you?
Doing well, Greg. Pleasure to be with you and your listeners.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring that up for the first 10 minutes of the show to show how important it is. Over the years, there have been over 6,000 different books written about the Jesuits over the course of history. And what this French writer said is most of them have been suppressed. And that's why it's important for people like you to come forward and write again and to continue throughout history, to continue writing against them, because they are just making it impossible for people to find truth. Now, I know people in the media are smart as me or you, and they know the truth. They're just suppressing it. And I wanted to get your opinion about how important it is to continue this pursuit of exposing the people who are really hiding the Jesuit and Vatican evils in this, what I call the Fourth Reich.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely important because it's the Jesuits who rule the country. And I have a quote in my book by G. Gordon Liddy, who was trained by Jesuits at Fordham, and his father was very intimately involved with the Jesuits there. And the quote in his book that I quote in mine is, his book is Will, the autobiography of G. Gordon Liddy. He says in there that the Jesuits at Fordham rule the world and they enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And G. Gordon Liddy knows who rules. And so all these guys in Washington know who rules in the Beltway. And yet they're under oath or under death threats not to say anything. And so as a result, the people think, well, in fact, there are two political parties, and there really is a race, and there really is an election, when that couldn't be any farther from the truth. So indeed, we need to continue to reveal the history of the Jesuits so that in the flow or in the stream of history, we're brought to the present, and it makes perfect sense as to how they got this power and how they rule.
Yeah, and that takes us to how they control the media. Just for a point, last time you were on the show, we discussed this in depth, but I think it's worth mentioning just for a couple minutes again. And when you start looking at some of the past books that have been written about the Jesuits, and your book, which cites numerous people throughout the course of history warning us about the Vatican and their evils, even up to the Croatian, the Croatian genocide in World War II, and just as late as the genocide in Rwanda in the 90s. And what's so upsetting is that none of these people who profess to be in the alternative media, who we talked about, will deal with these issues in a fact-by-fact basis. And I think the reason is, if they did, their cover would be finally up. What's your thoughts?
I agree completely, and they would not have a show anymore. I think the only one in the alternative media that ever really did deal with the Jesuits was sincerely and persistently was William Cooper. Mm-hmm. And so after they finished killing him, they felt that the main voice of exposing the Jesuits was gone, but little did they know the Lord had other things in mind, that there would be a host of other people now that would rise up and expose them for what they are. But indeed, the Jesuit order, what I want to concentrate on when I have my newsletter going and maybe even a broadcast with American Voice, and thinking about it for an hour a week, is to continually set forth the great authors of the past and what they wrote on the Jesuit order, with the great statesmen of Europe, what they had to say about them, the leaders in World War II, what they had to say about them, and so that the reader may become very, very familiar with Jesuit history, and so that he's not surprised to see that all these Jesuit grads are manning key positions in the media. So when you see the Jesuit connection there, then people can know that they have an agenda.
Yeah, and it not only stops with the media, it's also in our government and in the banking sector. And basically, if you look at some of their followers, it's amazing how much power they have. And it appears that they hide behind this one simple method, and that is to say, we are the sons of God, we are just a religious organization, and how dare you criticize us?
That's right. And you see, the reason why we can attack them is because we're taking their own writings that they don't want you to know.
Does Rome still rule? Did Rome fall? Or did it reincarnate? Rome did not fall to the Germanic tribes. In fact, it successfully absorbed and integrated them with their new main executive body, the Roman Catholic Church. This successfully Romanized one of their longest and most dangerous rivals, for now they were Roman in spirit and law. After converting to Roman Catholicism, they also began to adopt Roman law and wrote down their new laws in Latin. Of course, they would soon reincarnate into different successor states, such as the Holy Roman Empire and others. This has continued on until now. The truth is, society is more Roman today than it ever has been since the height of the Roman Empire. The main way the Roman Empire survives to this day is successfully reincarnated into various entities. The Catholic Church, of course, is one, but also the Western empires, Britain, France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire of the past, and even the Russian Empire, which is often called the Third Rome. The Ottomans even claimed to be a Roman successor state, which itself did not end until 1922. The term Western does not denote a geographical location, but a cultural origin, a Western or Roman origin. Today, the latest incarnations of Rome in the Western or Roman world rules through three separate yet allied incarnations: the Empire of the City-States, the Vatican, the City of London, and the District of Columbia. These three cities are separate nations within their puppet states and function as administrative bodies of the Roman incarnation, those being the British Empire, the American Republic, and the Roman Catholic Church. Rome functions as the spiritual branch, London as the financial, and Washington as the martial or military branch. In the Anglosphere, we like to think that we live in a parliamentary democracy, that we in Canada or Australia or New Zealand got our so-called independence in a civil and polite manner. This is not the case. We live in a constitutional monarchy. When we gained our so-called independence, it was not from the crown, but independence from the English Parliament. The English Parliament no longer has direct influence over our governments, but the crown is still the head of state. The queen is the direct ruler of all the crown states, which in fact does not make her a queen, but it makes her an empress. And there are many lines that direct this empress back to the house of Julii, the clan of Caesar himself, the Anglo-sphere. These states are not independent of the crown, but are now equal kingdoms under it. England, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Scotland, Wales, North Ireland, these are all separate kingdoms, equal amongst each other under the crown. So when you understand this, you understand that we are not in some parliamentary democracy, but we are in an empire, the British Empire, no longer ruled under the English Parliament, but directly under the crown. And in the coming years, we will see the emergence of Kanzak, which is a further integration of the crown colonies into a free movement empire similar to that of the European Union. And is the United States truly independent from Britain? The definitive Treaty of Peace in 1783 states, Prince George III, by the grace of God, King of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, Defender of the Faith, Duke of Brunswick and Lunebourg, Arch-Treasurer and Prince-Elector of the Holy Roman Empire and of the United States of America. So this treaty states that King George was not only king of the United Kingdoms, but Arch-Treasurer and Prince-Elect of the Holy Roman Empire and the United States of America. Also to note, Defender of the Faith is a Catholic title, Defender of the Catholic Church, and later we will link the monarchy and the church even in today's world. Now, of course, not everyone in the United States wanted this, and this is why this nation still holds a higher level of sovereignty. But the final outcome came during the War of 1812, and henceforth, America and Britain have been acting as the same geopolitical entity, the Anglo-American Empire. What we have to understand is that we still live with an empire. We are not members of a nation built on kinship, but subjects of imperial rule. In the West, there are two different types of government: parliamentary democracies and republics. The parliamentary democracies are ruled by a hereditary king or queen. Their descendants will inherit the throne and act as head of state. The republics base their rule on a form of government which power is held by the people and their elective representatives. But whether we are subjects to imperial rule or citizens of a republic, we are still ruled by an oligarchy. During an election, if a member is elected, he is not held accountable for the way he votes until his term is up. The voter has to have blind faith that the politician will vote based on the platform he has campaigned on. The member can vote however he wishes once in seat. He can vote to go to war, he can enact policies that go against his so-called party, he can do and vote however he wishes. Parties can develop massive plans and policies without the consent of the voter, and the voter can in no way challenge these policies unless there is another election. Our whole form of government is a faith-based process and taking politicians at their word. Where does this system come from? Why are we subject to it? Isn't Western democracy the freest and greatest of all forms of government since the dawn of time? Both the Republic model and the Imperial model stem from Rome, the twin-headed eagle. Our system of law today is still based on Roman law. Just look around you. It's everywhere. In fact, the term Western has nothing to do with geography. It is directly correlated to Roman civilization, not Western. Today, the term civil law and Roman law are used interchangeably within the justice system, and many legal terms still use Latin. The Roman system of law is punitive, not restorative justice. The people of the North and other surrounding civilizations, a completely different system of justice that was based on restoring payment to the party that was damaged. The Roman system of law punishes the offender and takes payment for the state. German legal theorist Rudolf von Jhering famously remarked that ancient Rome had conquered the world 3 times. The first through its armies, the second through its religion, and the third through its laws. He might have added, each time more thoroughly. Most of the world today falls under a civil or common law or a variation of the two. Both stem from Rome. Founding of Rome is shrouded in mystery, but it is clear that Romulus founded the kingdom and there formed the first order of knights, the Equites, from which all knightly orders are derived from today. The various secret societies have their origins from the Equites, the Knights Templar, who would later incarnate as the Freemasons, were a Roman Catholic order of knights. The Jesuits, another order, have their origins and their current headquarters in Rome. The Roman rivals. Rome spread throughout the Italian peninsula and faced off against Carthaginians, Greeks, and surrounding empires. They soon faced off with the Gauls, who eventually sacked their city, led by Brennus and his band of Celtic warriors. This was not forgotten, and will never be forgotten. It is since then, till today, the current and previous incarnations of Rome have targeted the Celts and their descendants. Even today, the Celtic ethnicity itself is brought into question. Here, we can clearly see an overlap between Celtic lands and a specific type of R1b. We can also see an overlap between Celtic lands and the prevalence of red hair. There is clearly a genetic component. Even today, red hair is demonized in our society. All the way back to Rome and up until the Inquisition to Kick a Ginger Day, redheads have been targeted. Even the notions that redheads are vampires, or witches, or possess some occult power comes from this ancient feud with Rome. In the German witch trials, which took place in Würzburg, Trier, Fulda, and Bamberg, ginger-haired people were said to have been put on trial, tortured, and murdered, under the assumption that those who possessed red tresses must have been witches. During the Spanish Inquisition, it was believed that red hair was a result of its wielder stealing fire from hell, and so many were branded as witches and burned to death. When Rome reincarnated into the British Empire, first people to be colonized were the ancient enemies, and finally, this score was settled. The Irish faced genocide with an engineered potato famine, which is often described as some sort of grand accident or lack of planning on the Irish, which is completely false. The other was the Highland clearance of the Scots, which stripped the herdsmen of their highlands and forced them to do the dangerous work of frontiering the colonies, thus finally achieving the 1,000-year goal of Romanizing the Celts. Red hair was much more common in Europe before the Roman Empire. In many Roman descriptions, Egyptians, Greeks, Thracians are all said to have red hair, a trait nearly extinct in their modern populations. Tacitus noticed in his Germania. Hence, too, The same physical peculiarities throughout so vast a population all have fierce blue eyes, red hair, huge frames. Herodotus described the Bundini, a Scythian tribe from central western Eurasian steppes, as having gray eyes and red hair. Seneca noted that the color of the Ethiopian is not singular among his countrymen, nor is red hair tied upon a knot a peculiarity among the Germans. Livy, in his History of Rome, describes the Gauls as tall of stature and having long red hair. Tacitus noted the Caledonians had red hair and large limbs, which he felt pointed to a Germanic origin. And today it is still socially acceptable to discriminate against redheads. It's a group that many celebrate and mocking. And the redhead aspect of Europe has mostly been wiped out due to genocide, slavery, and the Inquisitions. It is now sparse and only found in high numbers in the last of the Celtic lands. Other rivals of Rome would soon face its wrath in later incarnations. The Norsemen, the Balts, and the Slavs were all targeted with northern crusades, forcing them to adopt Roman spirit and law, or face the vast armies of the Church. The Norsemen, or commonly referred to as the Vikings, struck out against the Roman churches in the north of England, and this was not by accident. It was a planned strike of revenge against the slaughter of their southern kinsmen by Charlemagne and the Roman Church. Thus began the Viking Age as a reactionary war against the Roman and its laws and spirit. But soon, greed and promise of wealth slowly integrated the Norsemen into the Roman Catholic Church, like their Germanic brothers to the south did in the centuries before. The last group to fall to the churches of Rome were the Baltic peoples. The Royals and the Vatican. Do you find it strange that in the year 2021, we still have kings and queens, popes, magistrates, grand ceremonies, semi-religious military orders like the Swiss Guard and the Knights of Malta? Do you think that this question has even entered the minds of 99% of people on this planet while they go on in their day-to-day mundane life? The symbols of an oligarchy surround us. The royal orders and houses are still in great wealth and power in this world. They are seemingly forgotten by the masses, for their focus is always on the politicians, who are more like administrative pen pushers than actual rulers. We live in a world surrounded by ancient orders and bloodlines, operating in plain sight. Masonic lodges, and even the smallest towns throughout America. A group that claims heritage from an ancient order of knights. And speaking of knights, people today are still being knighted by the Queen and demand to be addressed with the given title, Sir, Lord, Lady, Baron. They are still in today's world. The Pope as well, surrounded by the Swiss Guard, an order of knights to protect the Pontifex Maximus, a man who claims to be in direct contact with God. The Pope is the spiritual leader to over 2 billion people on this planet, and billions of dollars flood the church's coffins every year. They pay no tax, they heed no equal, and they are one of the longest operating institutions in the world. The head of the Jesuits is called the Black Pope, and he is said to even be higher within the Roman system than the White Pope. He calls the shots for the Jesuits and runs his shadow cabinet to promote the Roman Church's agenda. Now you might be asking yourself how the royals and the Vatican are aligned if most of the royals are Protestants who split away from the Roman Church. This was merely done for political purposes to ease the peasants in the north who are growing weary of being ruled by far-flung Rome. It is the order of the Knights of Malta that connect the Catholic and Protestant bloodlines into this grand alliance. The Queen herself is a dame of the order, as well as various members of the royal bloodlines within Europe. There is even a Protestant branch of the Knights of Malta called the Johanniter Order. The order is diplomatically recognized by most of the world's government and even has neutral observer status by the UN. They are issued their own diplomatic passports in order to travel easily and without hassle while operating in the world. They receive no security checks. When the Queen meets the Pope, she usually dons her black robe to signify that she is a member of the Catholic Knights of Malta. Much of the royalty and notable figures of history are members of the Knights of Malta. Even Joseph Kennedy was a member. Are the Kennedys truly the royalty of America? So as we look around us, we once again see that we are living in a world of emperors, kings, knights, orders, and occult societies, all hidden in plain sight for all to see. And what is the agenda? Well, all we need to do is look at the current Pope to see what is the deal. His main goal is globalism, universalism, and integration between the countries, for the world to accept the Roman system and governance. That is the goal, which they have largely already succeeded in. The light of Rome. The Illuminati, Jesuits, New World Order, Freemasons, and all the various factions that the truth community has collectively pointed to have their origins within Rome and the Roman system. The goal of the Roman Empire has always been to expand, colonize, and quote-unquote civilize the known world. So what does it mean to be civilized? The English word civilization comes from Latin civilis, civil, related to civis, citizen, and civitas, city. Is to be a citizen of a city, or to be ruled by a city or city-state. The goal of Rome was to destroy the honor-based, barbaric, free societies and integrate them to a Roman law-based and civilized society. Or to remove honor from a society has always been the goal of Rome. In the pre-Roman world, society was based around personal reputation and their interactions you had with society based on your own personal honor. It was contextual and a restorative-based justice system. Roman law is by the letter of the law, not based on context, but the written rules that all must follow. Context is not taken into account. Justice is not restored to the injured party, but to the state or the crown. Justice is not blind, but rather bought, for whoever has the funds to defend themselves can always have the better course in the outcome. Poor who cannot fund themselves are often disadvantaged. The Germanic concept of Wehrgild, justice was given as a form of compensation to the injured party. Though not a perfect system, at the very least the injured party would receive something for the damage. And in this northern system, free men could vote on matters of war. Today, we vote for people, and they can bring us to war even if they ran as an anti-war candidate. These republics and constitutional monarchies are the ultimate oligarchic system. Biggest lie they've ever told you is that democracy started in Rome or the United States. Democracy has always existed in one form or another in these ancient cultures, the Indo-European cultures. Free men could vote for their sacred kings and vote to go or abstain from war. This is what it means to be free. A person who has a vote in matters of peace and war. We currently do not have these rights. In the northern kingdoms, even a slave could earn freedom if he showed great merit and courage. But in the Roman world, You were bound to your name for life. Only extremely rare circumstances could anyone earn freedom. There was no rising in social strata. It was your name, not your deeds, that created your destiny. Now you may be asking yourself, if Rome rules, then why are there so many wars, succession crises, and factions within this world order? Well, that is the Roman way. The way of intrigue, of knives in the back, of scheming in the shadows, of betrayal. Et tu, Brutus? There will always be factions within this system vying for control at the top, and that is part of the system. It is built in the system. That is exactly what they want. To be a backstabber, a betrayer, a schemer is to be Romanized. The goal of the Roman Catholic Church has been to Romanize foreign peoples and steal and conceal their occult knowledge. This was most obvious with their conquest of the Celtic peoples and the subsequent hunting down and slaughtering of the Druids, the priest class. All the knowledge that they stole from the Druids, they took back to Rome to be stored in their secret vaults. Soon this knowledge was all accumulated at the Vatican Library, where hundreds of rare books on occultism and psychic power are hidden from the masses. Rome, and then later the Holy Romans under Charlemagne, went throughout Europe to destroy all the knowledge in sacred areas of the Celts and Germans and Slavs. Groves were cut down, Druids were put to the sword, and nobles were betrayed. America and Rome. Out of all the past and current reincarnations of Rome, the United States is the most glaring in terms of the overlap of the two societies. The United States is a bread and circus society. The plebs are kept pacified with football, gladiatorial games, and the theater, while the legions go forth and conquer. Anyone can be a citizen of the Republic if they are born on its soil, or if they fight in its legions. Even the U.S. House of Representatives symbol is the Roman mace. Society is becoming more and more Roman every year. Excess, lust, and degeneracy are becoming the mainstays of society, as the honor-based morality that lingered for so long is now finally gone and eroded. In 2021, we have become more Romanized than ever before. Look at the government buildings within the United States. They're all modeled after the Roman system. And America, like Rome, seeks cultural assimilation. Goes out into the world, conquering and absorbing, taking in what it finds useful from the outside, and discarding all traditions that hamper its growth. Rome's biggest success was keeping the plebs occupied with its bread and circuses, the never-ending novelty of the games in order to keep its taxpayers happy, despite them being socially stratified. Same goes in America. And they have surpassed even the Romans in their ability to keep the masses dumbed and occupied. The arenas that fill every city and town across the nation, endless theaters programming the nations, the endless degeneracy available on their black screen portals. We live in Rome. It surrounds us to this day. And I ask for all my fellow barbarians to never submit to its rule.
Many people today are waking up to the evils of Zionism, but very few realize who the real puppet masters are behind the scenes. Today you're going to learn who those puppet masters are and why Zionism was created, which is ultimately to serve the beast. Welcome to the show, everybody. You're listening to the Dance of Life podcast, and I'm your host, Tudor Alexander. Welcome to this very important episode. You know, I thought I was done making videos about Zionism, and I am, but I thought I would make one more, one-stop shop where you can get all of the important info to help your friends wake up from the spell that is being put on them with the controlled demolition of the Zionist and dispensational agenda that is very active right now in the world. So hopefully this video will be very edifying to you and to your friends who are getting quote-unquote Jew-pilled. All of the evil, all of the Zionist, all of the Jewish power shenanigans that have been going on and that now people are waking up to are actually a very carefully crafted narrative and controlled demolition to ultimately bring people back to Catholicism. If that sounds absolutely crazy to you right now, then please stick around for this video and indulge the other resources that are cited in here. The Bible says that Satan gave his power and great authority and his throne to Rome. And a big part of Rome's efforts in the world in the last 500 years especially have been the Jesuits. Of course, it's not just the Jesuits. You also have the Knights of Malta. You have other Catholic orders. You have other secret societies like Freemasons, Illuminati, all these types of things. They're all one shadow government that works behind the scenes. The Synagogue of Satan. I talk about this in my Synagogue of Satan, which I'm going to put this video as a kind of addendum or bonus right at the end of that series. It'll be part of it. But nevertheless, today I want to lay out a kind of like a lightning round of facts so that you can be equipped to discuss this with your friends and to help them out of the deception because they're being baited by all of the Jew hatred and Zionist, anti-Zionist propaganda, which it is propaganda. Propaganda has some truth to it, right? That's why it's effective. But of course, it takes the truth and veers you off the narrow road. So today you will learn that truth and have a more nuanced understanding of the evil that is in the world and also, very importantly, the direction of history, because most people are deceived by the direction of history. We're going to look at things that you can find easily online. I'm not doing any super crazy, PDF book research here. You can do that on your own. I'll cite some books that you can use. But nevertheless, we're going to look at very easily discoverable things that are public information and show you the truth that you can just see for yourself. It's important to remember that Satan has many tentacles in the world, and one of them is Zionism. It is the Talmud, it is Judaism, and it is all these Antichrist things. And every tentacle has a purpose, my friends. Every tentacle has a purpose. This is something you need to understand about Satan. Satan is not chaotic. He's not stupid. Okay? He's not haphazard. He is the most cunning being that God has ever created. The devil is extremely calculating. He's very brilliant and intelligent, and he's very conniving. So he doesn't just do things just to do them. Everything has a purpose. So every one of his tentacles in the world, whether it's atheism or Zionism or Freemasonry or whatever else, it always has a purpose. And for him, that purpose is to ultimately receive worship. So everything that he created, every psyop that's ever been created, has a purpose to ultimately serve that end time goal. And of course, the Bible tells you very importantly that he will be successful at the very end for a short time. But nevertheless, he will be successful. That means that all of these things are being integrated into that final outcome. The devil did many evil things through Talmudic Judaism. He baited the Jews into many evil things that you can look into yourself. Coin clipping, poisoning the wells, usury, blood libel, Kabbalah, many things that you can't even talk on YouTube about. And I won't talk about them because I don't need to talk about them. You can look into them yourself. But nevertheless, these things are probably a little more well-known now with all the shenanigans going around with Israel and the Middle East. But nevertheless, all of these things now, what was the purpose? What was the purpose? If no psyop of the devil is ever wasted, and the devil is not chaotic but extremely calculated, what was the purpose for doing all of these evil things through the Jews and baiting them into all these Antichrist activities? Well, the purpose, my friends, is very simple. Satan did it so that he could ultimately have a cakewalk in using the Jews as a scapegoat. When the Jews said, "We have no king but Caesar," and pledged their fealty to the power of the Antichrist on earth, which of course that was the succession of the satanic throne throughout history, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. When Jews pledged their power to Rome, we have no king but Caesar, their fate was sealed. The Jews who rejected Jesus, their fate was sealed to be intertwined with the devil. And that's been the case, and you'll learn that again today throughout history. So the Jews are just a scapegoat, and they're going to be a very easy scapegoat. Do you get it? All of the evil things that I listed off and that you're learning through the news and all the mainstream things that are going mainstream now, that it's coming on this undercurrent that is bubbling up through the surface. All of these things are so easy. They're so obviously evil that, of course, if you question them and you say, well, it's not entirely the Jews, it's more nuanced than that, people look at you funny and, think that you're a dispensationalist or whatever. It's not true. Just like when you point to Trump and you say, well, Trump's not the good guy, people think, oh, you're a Democrat? It's not how things work, my friends. Both sides are controlled, and everything that's happening to you in the media that's being revealed is a controlled situation. The devil is the god of this world. He is not going to be exposed on mainstream awareness. The majority of people are going to be deceived. So the things that you're seeing in the mainstream media, where they are exposing the Jews and all of this undercurrent of evil activity, and people are starting to realize, oh my gosh, we're getting Jew-pilled. Do you really think that that's the final thing? Like we found it? We found the heart of darkness and everybody's waking up to the devil's schemes? Or is it just a controlled demolition to bait you in a particular direction with a little carrot of things that are true to ultimately do a bait and switch and flip you into the final trick? The collapse of Zionism is going to be used, and it's being used to destroy Protestantism once and for all, and ultimately to destroy the Jewish identity so that it can be reinvented in Catholicism. Once the Jews are converted, there will be no more obstacle to enforcing obedience to the pontiff through Sunday sacredness, through this religious delusion, through this religious system. There'll be no more obstacle, folks. The Jews are a real problem for the devil. Of course, he had that plan from the very beginning because he knew that the Sabbath is a command. The devil knows God's word better than everybody else. He knows that the Sabbath is God's special day, that that's what identifies God's people when they rest in him also physically. And he knew that by getting the Jews to do all of these evil things, he could make the Sabbath seem like such a disgusting, despicable thing that you never want to do. And that was the point. If you study the early church history, which I have in my Lord's Day series, a 17-hour, 18-hour series or something like that, you can learn lots and lots of history in that series. How there's nothing new under the sun. In the beginning, when the church was being persecuted by the Roman Empire, and there was pressure on the Christians not to look like the Jews, because at first, actually, the Jews were persecuting their own kind, and then the Jews revolted, and the Romans started persecuting the Jews. So throughout this whole time, there was a lot of pressure on God's people to not do the Jewish thing. Don't be like the Jews. Don't be like those, evil Jews that are revolting or being gluttons or being legalists. So many different ways that the devil used the Jews as scapegoats to make the Sabbath seem so undesirable and wicked, or, like the ceremonial system or whatever else. Legalistic. Resting in God is a delight. We're not legalists by enjoying a day off from work and from spending time mindfully with God, with gratitude on our mind, exploring nature, studying the Bible more, having fellowship. These are wonderful, beautiful things that help you reset, and they give you strength. And at the end of time, my friends, whether you like it or not, the Antichrist power will come back into the world. It's already in the world, but it will be back in the sense that people are going to marvel after this power. And this power is going to want obedience. And one of the main ways that it will obtain obedience, and it has obtained obedience historically, is by enforcing its own way of worship, which is to stop activity on Sunday, the first day of the week. I am not an Adventist. It's not about Sunday laws. It's about obedience. And if you understand history and the direction of history, you understand why this is going to be such an issue and why the Jews need to be converted. so that they can destroy all options for you to hide. Because once the Jews convert and you have these rabbis that are saying they saw the light of the Eucharist and they saw the light of Sunday now, and Jesus is our Lord and we're going to rest with him on Sunday because that's the resurrection day. Join the new covenant. When you have all these rabbis pointing the finger at you and calling you a Judaizer, and people calling you demonically possessed or a heretic or whatever else, you know that the time will be near. So whether you listen to me right now or you find my words foolishness or you get insulted by what I say, that is up to God. I hope that God will open your eyes and open your ears if you're listening to this and help you see what you need to see, because there are more. It's not as simple as it's being made to seem. Zionism is very evil. Dispensationalism is a delusion. I've talked about these things hours upon hours upon hours in my various videos on end times materials. But there's more behind the scenes. There's an evil power that seems like it is the will of God on earth. And that evil power is Rome and the papacy. And that papacy, that unit that controls the Jesuits, of course, people say, is it the Jesuit general? Is it the Pope? Is it the papal families? Who cares, really? It doesn't matter. At that point, they're all in communion with the devil. But Rome is the one that controls the world, folks. And you need to learn your history. And today, my goal would be to help you do that. So subscribe, like, share, comment, share with your friends, help them out of the delusion. It's kind of like that movie Maze Runner. I don't know if you've ever seen it. There's actually a few of them, but kind of spoiler alert. They get out of this maze and then they wake up that are another maze. And so that's the way this whole thing works with psyops after psyops after psyops. People are waking up to the psyop of dispensationalism and Christian Zionism. And if you're not careful, the next psyop is there ready to devour you. And that's my goal with this video, is to help people come out of one psyop and avoid the other. Because the entire point of revealing to you part of the truth is to devour you with the next thing. So don't be devoured. Soon we'll have to worry about these things a little more, but nevertheless, God will be with us. So do not panic, but rejoice. Rejoice, because as you see these things come to pass, as you see a charismatic revival in the Middle East, as you see Sunday laws worldwide, as you see a technocratic image of the beast coming to life, religion and politics merging, as you see more monarchical styles of ruling, these things are signs of the very, very end. And that is something to rejoice. I don't think the world has more than 10 years. I could be wrong. But nevertheless, I don't see the world going into the 2040s. Let's put it that way. So the time is near. And we have to evangelize people in the meantime from things like dispensationalism, Christian Zionism, even lukewarm Protestantism, having a more narrow faith, or conservatives, people who are, hardcore trad, whatever, traditional, and getting quote unquote Jew pilled. They're actually getting Catholic pilled, my friends. They're actually getting Catholic pilled. You think you're getting Jew pilled, you're actually getting Catholic pilled if you're not careful. It's like you got a pill and it's actually something that you don't think it is. So there's a lot to talk about, and we're going to lay this out in historical order. I've talked about these in my Synagogue of Satan series, my End Time series, my Great Delusion series, my Venerable Day of the Sun episodes. I have a lot of videos on these types of topics. So I'm not going to cite every absolute thing I'm talking about here. I'm going to have some sources that we're going to look at. We have lots of sources, but nevertheless, I'm not going to document every single thing because I've documented it in other places. My point is just to give you a lightning round type of narrative so that you understand from point A to point B what's actually going on with this whole thing. If you want the video or the notes, you can access that in the library. You can either purchase the library now or you can download it. Now, let's talk about from 70 AD to about 1600 AD, give or take. After the temple was destroyed, the Jews were obviously dispersed and they went to different parts of the world. After that, they had other revolts like the Bar Kokhba revolt, and I forget the other one, but nevertheless, there were these other revolts, these people that were coming around, they're messianic figures and trying to lead an army against the Roman power. And of course, they failed. They failed miserably and they were totally destroyed and they had to flee and disperse and everything else. Many Jews fled to Europe, especially the noble families. and they took their craft of building various things like masonry with them. And of course, that created operant Freemasonry. Freemasonry, if you look into it, was originally a Jewish thing. It was a Jewish thing. They had their esoteric, architectural understandings, and they brought that into Europe. Eventually, a couple hundred years down the line, the original Templars had some Jewish blood in them, and that was a part of their motivation for going to Jerusalem, to going back and doing the crusade, because they wanted to find the treasures that their families had left behind. But anyway, for 1,500 years, the Jews were nobody. By and large, they were nobody. They were a ragtag, nomadic group of people. They were kicked out of 100-plus countries for all their shenanigans that I mentioned earlier. And everybody knew and hated the Jews. They hated the Jews, and they had good reason to hate the Jews. Christianity had no sense, absolutely zero sense, that the Jews would return to their homeland and build their own state again, because they believed that God was done with the Jews. That was a very clear thing in Scripture and also in history. Various false messiahs came at different times, like I said, from even after 70 AD, all the way through, the 1500s, 1600s. And all these false messiahs basically, had national ambitions. They wanted to rally the Jews and have a nation again to some degree. But these things were not mainstream. They never really got off the ground. You can't say that they were actually mobilizing the Jews into some huge thing where there's this giant immigration towards the Holy Land and they're trying to set up a state. That never really happened. They were just these philosophers and writers, and they had, very little success. Nevertheless, the Jews always wanted a materialistic salvation. Even in Jesus' time, the Jews were obsessed with returning back to the empire that they had with Solomon. They thought Jesus was coming to usher in a golden age. Sound familiar? And basically, take care of the Romans and everything else. So the Jews always had that desire, and they still have that desire today. And that's an important point to remember, because that desire was manipulated by the powers that be to create the current movement of Zionism, which of course is also being collapsed. So the question is, what changed? What changed that is so important? Well, I'll tell you what changed, and that change was the Reformation. The Reformation was a serious problem for the papacy, for the beast, because it threatened to destroy its hold over the world. Especially you had the printing press. At the time, you were also dealing with the Ottoman Empire. People were leaving, to the Americas. It was a mess. It was a total mess. So the Jesuits were formed in the 1500s, 1534, to basically take care of this problem. The Jesuits were the, like the CIA secret ops, PSYOP division of the Vatican. Of course, the Vatican didn't necessarily exist as the Vatican at that time, but of the papacy. And their role was to infiltrate, governments, infiltrate Protestantism, assassinate people, shape culture, create revolutions, do anything possible to stop this problem, and to bring ultimately people back to the Catholic Church. One of their first orders of business was to change how people interpreted Bible prophecy. Because obviously, if the interpretation that the Catholic Church is the system of Antichrist and the papacy is the man of sin, that's a real problem. You can't really operate in the daylight if people are looking at you and say, hey, there's the devil. And so that's a real problem. So they had to do it in such a way where the Catholic Church was not the enemy, and the Catholic Church and the Jesuits could hide in plain daylight and do their shenanigans and operate without being discovered. So you had key Jesuits, Francisco Ribera, Manuel Lacunza, Robert Bellarmine, all created modern Jewish-focused futurism, which really is dispensationalism. They wrote these various treatises and commentaries on Revelation and basically created the idea of, the 7 years of tribulation, the state of Israel, the third rebuilt Jewish temple, all these type of things that eventually made their way into Protestantism. And I talk about that in my Great Delusion series quite a bit, so you can check that out. There's also Luis de Alcazar, who wrote the first commentary on Revelation as a preterist. There were some, scant, handful of people maybe before him, probably about 100, 150 years before him, that were preterists, and they had some preterist ideas. But look, any preterists love to say, people talked about preterism as far back as Eusebius. Eusebius was not a preterist, man. Eusebius's commentary on, Luke 21 or Matthew 24 being about the destruction of the temple does not mean that Eusebius was a preterist. Okay? If people were preterists, and the majority of Christians were preterist, then there would have been no reason to get Revelation back in the canon. Revelation was the last book to be added in the canon. Okay? And by the way, it was written after 70 AD, but nevertheless, I talk about that in my End Time series. But nevertheless, it was added to the canon in like the 4th century. It was the final book to be added. Why would it be added if people thought that the Bible had to, or the Revelation, the book of Revelation, had to do with the Jews in the past? Yes, Matthew 24 and Luke 21 have some preterist fulfillment in the sense that they are having to do with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. That's not all they have to do with, because there's double fulfillment. There are double issues going on there. But Eusebius recognizing that that was part of that was having to do with the destruction of the temple. That's anybody can do that. That's obvious. So that doesn't make him a preterist. So why is this important? It's important because for the most of church's history, nobody was a preterist. Nobody thought that all of these warnings of Thessalonians, Revelation, Daniel, everything else had to do with the Jews in the past. Until really Luis de Alcazar published his commentary on Revelation and eventually infiltrated Protestantism with that as well. So nowadays, a lot of people are preterists, and they don't realize that preterism is a false teaching and is designed to take your attention off the Antichrist power and move you into the New World Order, the New World counterfeit Christian order. But anyway, I digress. It's important to understand that both futurism and preterism were alive before these Jesuits. Futurism especially, futurism was kind of the more common way people were interpreting Revelation, but they didn't have this idea of, the third rebuilt temple, a Jewish state, a 7-year tribulation. This is all nonsense. They did believe in a literal 1,000-year millennial reign, and there was some future sense to that. Of course, you can't blame them. They didn't have that much historical context. Like the early church fathers, when they were reading these things, they didn't have that much historical context, so they read it literally. And that was generally the idea that Jesus would return, he would install a government for 1,000 years, and, basically that would be a golden age type of thing. So that was generally how people understood Revelation. The Jesuits took that and weaponized it and turned it towards the focus towards Judaism and Jews and Israel and everything else. Preterism, same thing. Like I said, there were people before Luis de Alcazar, but then after him, he really took that and weaponized it. But the point is this, they weaponized these things and they put people's attention either to the future or to the past. That's how the devil works. There's a narrow road, either to the right or to the left. And once you see that pattern, you can sniff out all of the devil's schemes anywhere you go, because it's very obvious. Nobody was therefore looking in the present moment and in present history to understand what is actually happening. And Satan's kingdom was able to be cloaked because they deceived the world into these various false eschatologies. Eventually, people like Manuel Lacunza, which, by the way, Manuel Lacunza, he wrote his commentary on Revelation through a pen name, a Jewish pen name. I think it was Rabbi something Ben Yosef or something like that. So a Jesuit is pretending to be a Jew to get his basically commentary out there and avoid any responsibility. So that should tell you everything. But nevertheless, that commentary eventually reached people like Irving and Darby in the Plymouth Brethren in England, and the rest, as they say, is history. Schofield was probably a Freemason. At the very least, he was promoted by Freemasons. He was also a puppet of the Rothschilds. And of course, everybody knows about the Rothschilds and the Oxford Press and all of these things that are so controversial, but most people don't realize that the Rothschilds are actually the guardians of the papal treasure. Rothschild, that means red shield. So let's read about the Rothschild really quick. This is a site I've looked at before. It's called The Rothschilds or Jesuits, and you can look at it. Now I think the website is down, so I'm using the the Wayback Machine. But I'm not going to read every single thing on here. I'm just going to read a few quotes, and there's a lot on here. I've cited it before, I think, in my Synagogue of Satan series. You can read it yourself, but I'll cite to you a few of these. If you are not American, you will understand why your country is on its present course, as it too is controlled by the Jesuit general through his select Jesuits, Knights of Malta, Shriner Freemasons, and Knights of Columbus, and the Illuminati's Masonic, Kabbalistic, Labor, Zionist, Sabbatian, Frankist, named after the Black Popes baptized Jacob Frank, Jewish House of Rothschild. For the order controlled the infamous House of Rothschild since no later than the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars, after which Jesuit-led crusade the Rothschild family was surnamed the Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. That's Eric John Phelps, Vatican Assassins. Let's see, there's a couple here I highlighted. International finance and banking are not primarily Jewish. Many of the most powerful banking interests in the world are run by Gentiles. One of the most powerful forces in international banking is the Knights of Malta, a Roman Catholic military order controlled by the Jesuit Superior General. Sadly, even a certain segment of the alternative media helps to propagate the lie that the Jews run international banking. Interestingly, one of the titles of the Rothschild banking dynasty is Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. The Jews as a people have been used for centuries as a scapegoat by these international banksters and their secret societies, such as the Jesuit-controlled Knights of Malta. To label the Jews as running banking, Hollywood, etc., is to throw out the proverbial red herring designed to throw us off the scent of the real controllers. Yeah, Hollywood, most people don't realize that Hollywood was started by Jesuits and Catholics, and the Jesuits are the ones who practiced and invented the idea of projecting an image onto a screen or a wall like 100, 150 years before Hollywood was started. And they were the ones that owned all the theaters in Europe, and they were shaping culture to basically bring people back to this Catholic ideal, just like they're doing today. Of course, they let Hollywood become liberal, and they let the Jews go to town so that now there could be a scapegoat. Do you get it? One more, I think the Rothschilds were Jesuits who used their Jewish background as a fause to cover their sinister activities. The Jesuits, working through Rothschild and financier Nicholas Biddle, sought to gain control of the banking system in the United States. The Jesuits used Biddle and the Rothschild to gain the upper hand in American banking because they knew they could control the people and effectively rewrite the Constitution according to papal law. Jackson was trying to stop them. We have already seen that the Rothschilds were the banking agents for the papacy's church. These three financial families, the Rothschilds, Morgans, and Rockefellers, all do the bidding of the Jesuit order because of the Jesuit infiltration in their organizations. They do whatever is necessary to destroy constitutional liberty in America and to bring the Pope to world domination. As we look back over the 20th century, we see how successful the Jesuits have been. They have continued to squander the wealth of America and continually attack its great constitution and civil liberties. Daily, the power of the Pope in the Vatican City increases. One day, they will achieve total power again. Does the Bible say that? Absolutely. So that's in alignment with what the Bible says. That's Bill Hughes, The Secret Terrorists. It's a great book. One more, seldom is it mentioned that the Rothschilds, along with other Western bankers and industrialists, financed the rise of Hitler as a bulwark against the Soviets. The ultra-right wing falsely describes the Rothschilds as Jewish bankers when in fact the Rothschilds are interwoven with the Catholic Church and jointly with the traditional mafia and the American CIA interlocked with the Vatican Bank, which was pro-Nazi. Which, by the way, the CIA, you'll find out today, was founded by Knights of Columbus, Knights of Malta members. And of course, the Rothschilds are interwoven with the Catholic Church. Here's an example of that. David René de Rothschild, Baron David James de Rothschild, born December yada yada, is a French banker and a member of the French branch of the Rothschild family. Since 2018, he is supervisory board chairman of Rothschild & Company and chairman of the Rothschild Continuation Holdings in the Swiss holding company. So let's see if we can find where he was married to. Aldobrandini. Here we go. There it is. Spouse, Princess Olympia Anna Aldobrandini. Aldobrandini, if you know your history, that is one of the papal families, one of the elite papal families, like the Medici, like what's the other ones? Firenze or whatever their name is. Anyway, there's a lot of them. I think there's like 12 or 13 of them. Orsini. Aldobrandini is married to Mr. Rothschild. So what does that mean? That means that these two threads are interwoven by the devil. And of course, it's not just the Jews. The Jews are just a scapegoat because ultimately Satan needs to destroy that to integrate his system. So if you want some further reading on all of these things, check out Bill Hughes, The Secret Terrorists, Eric John Phelps, Vatican Assassins, Tupper Saucy, Rulers of Evil. These are all very well documented books that talk about these things in great depth. Rothschild means red shield in German. So they are the shield. They're the shield of the papacy. In other words, you can think of them as the scapegoat. They're the scapegoat, the shield that protects the dragon and the dragon's wealth. Rothschild became a thing during the French Revolution because the Jesuits were kicked out of many countries for starting revolutions. Sound familiar? They were kicked out of, I think, 100-something countries. They were extorting tons of money. They had their, what do you call it? Oh, what's the name of those little bases in the reductions? The reductions in South America. They had the reductions in South America where they were practicing basically Catholic communism, oppressing the Guarani Indians there and basically being treated as gods and extorting them millions, probably, I mean, in today's world, probably billions and billions of dollars worth of, trade and everything that they were extorting. And the monarchs found out about it. They realized that they were running this entire kingdom under the nose of all these monarchs and doing whatever they wanted with it. So they kicked the Jesuits out. And of course, this was a real problem for the Jesuits because they, needed to have control. And so they realized, okay, we need to get rid of these monarchs. We need to get rid of these monarchs and create a situation where there's a temporary way that we can basically fool everybody into thinking that they're in control, but we're actually in control until the plan is complete and we can go back to a monarchical system. So the Jesuits fomented the French Revolution. I have a whole episode on that. I've talked about that quite a bit. But they used secret societies plus central banking to infiltrate countries, create revolutions, lend money to both sides, and ultimately take control of both parties doing that. So central banking plus infiltration and revolutions, that was their formula. And they did that over and over and over again since the French Revolution in many places. Meanwhile, Protestantism was completely oblivious to these things because of its destroyed eschatology. They were looking at the Jews and dispensationalism and all the nonsense that was happening in the 1800s. So the Reformation changed the direction of the Jews as a people because Satan had to hide his empire on earth. The Jesuits, many original Jesuits were Jews, by the way, before they had the blood laws. But the Jesuits were formed to infiltrate and destroy Protestantism. And because of the climate in Europe, with the monarchs hating the Jesuits and turning on them, the revolution needed to happen. Something needed to change. We need a new system of government. That's why the French Revolution basically installed this system that we have today, which is the two-party system. You have democracy, quote unquote, which is, left side and right side. You have conservative, liberal. But these are just dialectics, folks. These are dialectics to give people the illusion of free will and basically the illusion of self-governance, which really allowed them to infiltrate their people into these governments, control the agenda, while you, as a goyim looking on the outside, think, oh, wow, it's going to the left, it's going to the right, I got to vote more next time, or whatever else. And the agenda is still going the direction they want it to, but you have the illusion that basically it's, being led by the people. Just like they used, or I should say, just like they destroyed eschatology to blind the Protestants from the true danger on the earth, the two-party system blinded people to the hidden hand behind the scenes, which of course are secret societies, the Jesuits, and so on. Atheism was also created as an opposite to Catholicism. Ultimately, the role of atheism and ultimately communism was to destroy society and destroy everything that was sacred, destroy the family, destroy sexuality, destroy everything, so that Catholicism and Catholic social teaching could come in and rescue it. See my videos on the Jesuits and communism, especially in the Synagogue of Satan series, the chapter on that. Communism is not a Jewish thing, folks. It's not. The Jesuits developed communism for 150 plus years before the French Revolution, and they got very good at it. Once the French Revolution happened, they were instrumental in exporting it eventually to China, Vietnam, Russia, South America, and so on. And I document all of that in my video. Does that mean the Jews weren't involved? Absolutely not. The Jews were definitely present. But one thing that people don't realize is that the Jews who were present were secret society pawns that couldn't care less about actual Jews. If you look at pictures of Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, all these people, they all had pictures with their hands in their coat. Okay, they're Freemasons. Okay, they're secret society, devil-loving Jews. And they're not really, you can't even call them Jews, really. They're just, who knows if what level of genetics they have, whether they're Ashkenazi or something else. But they're people who say they're one thing and they're not. Synagogue of Satan. The Synagogue of Satan is not just the Jews. It is people who say they are followers of God, because the Muslims have secret societies too. The Jews have secret societies too. The Christians have secret societies. Everybody has a secret that they hold, and they're saying, oh, I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew, I'm a Muslim, I love God, or whatever else. And on the back end, they're all holding hands and worshiping the devil. So this is what you're dealing with, folks. You're dealing with a duplicitous system. But nevertheless, the Jews are present, and of course, today, they are the scapegoats of communism and the communist things. But if you dig deep enough, there's always a hidden hand behind these things. All of these people were puppets. They were secret society members with multiple identities and duplicitous ways of being. Nevertheless, the French Revolution was an inflection point in history, a very important inflection point. Because, why? Well, because of several reasons. It created the two-party system to move the agenda forward, while people are being ignorant and thinking that they're the ones controlling it. So that's deceptive government. Eventually, that two-party system would be so broken on purpose, which is what's happening now, that people will demand going back to monarchies. And of course, when they do demand a king, when they do demand monarchical rule, then by that point, everything's ready. The Jesuits have taken control of the world through Rothschild banking, central banking, revolutions, infiltrations, assassinations. They've done that very much over the last 250 plus years. And now they're ready. So that's why all of these things are collapsing, and we are going back to religion and politics being united. People wanting a more monarchical system of rule. People basically starting to hate the Jews again. All of these things are going backwards in time to where they used to be because everything is ready now. When the French Revolution happened, the monarchs were out of control. The Jesuits didn't have control over the world. So they had to subvert all these systems and then go back to them because they want monarchs. A monarch on the throne is much better than having, a two-party system. Are you kidding me? When you have a monarch that's a puppet pledging his power to the Pope, then that's way better for them. So they want monarchical rule. They want a monarchy. But the problem wasn't monarchy, it was the monarchs. Do you get it? So they had to destroy these systems, infiltrate all these governments, make sure their people are in power, make sure their banking system controls all the finances, and then they can call the shots and go back to their preferred system of government, which is monarchical system. Nevertheless, another thing that the French Revolution did was to create communism and, of course, destroy Christian countries like Europe, Latin America, and Russia, which all would set a precedent for Catholicism to come in and rescue them later. Religion, really, organized religion. Meanwhile, while they're doing all these things with, creating the two-party system, communism, they're subverting Protestantism with bad eschatology, infiltrators, to the point where you make Protestantism look so ridiculous between Christian Zionism, woke ideology, prosperity preaching, charismatic movement, all the things that have happened in the last, 150 plus years, that people will be so embarrassed of Protestantism, especially when the final card is toppled. And of course, that card is the Zionist card, which is happening now. As a result of Zionism's controlled demolition, people are discrediting Protestantism so hard that they are leaving in droves to Catholicism. And that's exactly the point. It's right on cue, folks. It's right on cue. The Zionist movement was also created during that time. We'll talk about this in just a little bit. But around that time, the Zionism was created so that the Jews would be the scapegoats for all these problems. And eventually, the point was to collapse Zionism in tandem with all of these other things, like collapsing liberalism, like collapsing Protestantism. All these things are collapsing in a very controlled and carefully orchestrated symphony, so that the final result is everybody marveling after the beast. This has been the agenda for the last 250 years, and I've talked about it many times in many places. It's all just been one giant dark to light.